Chapter 1. Returning Home After the Reunion. Besides still needing answers from my mother when I returned home after the reunion, I continued to feel emotional. I also reached out again to Elsie, the caseworker at the Department of Children and Families, who had searched her database to see if my siblings were adopted through their agency. A few days after the reunion, I took off work because I was not feeling well. While at home that day, I realized that part of the reason why I was not feeling well was because I was struggling with the way my mother was living. I felt so downhearted that I sensed I needed someone trustworthy to talk to externalize my emotions. Because of the shock that came with finding my mother living in poverty, I had to be extra careful not to talk to just anyone. Most importantly, I had to do it sooner rather than later. After a meticulous online search, I found the number of a counseling hotline where I could speak with someone freely without revealing my true identity. When I called, a woman answered and I asked her if this was the type of line where I can have a counseling session with someone. She said it was not exactly counseling, but a line in which people talked and she listened. She said she could listen if I needed to talk. Feeling like this was just what I needed, I asked, "So I can start talking to you right now and you will listen?" "Yes," she readily answered. Realizing I finally had a golden opportunity to share what was on my heart concerning my mother, with someone who did not know me and therefore could not judge me, tears welled up in my eyes. I cried and began to talk about my feelings. I talked about how I found my mother after 49 years and how I was not happy about the place she has been living. I expressed how my mother was living with beggars and peddlers who steal from her. I conveyed how I had always imagined I would find her in a mental hospital, locked up, maybe drugged up, and not able to speak. I thought she would be in a safe environment, unlike where she was. She was living in a place where she has to pray for her safety every single day. My mother is not supposed to be living under those impoverished conditions. I had never imagined she would actually be able to speak, nor that she would be living in such disadvantaged surroundings. I told the woman that over the years before finding my mother, I had often thought of starting a homeless shelter that would accommodate anyone and everyone who needed a place to live, with no requirements and no expectations. They could just come get their needs met, be it food, a warm, dry place to lay their head for one night, or a permanent place of shelter. Whenever I had those thoughts, I never imagined my own mother would be living in a similar environment. Fortunately, she was not homeless. She had been there for over 15 years, so even though I did not like where she was living, she was surrounded by a stable environment, which she was content to call her home. Accepting this, I began to feel better about my mother's situation. A sense of appreciation came over me as I realized I had actually come an extremely long way from having no idea where my mother was to finally finding her and talking with her. The woman on the counseling hotline sensed I was feeling better. She had done a great job keeping quiet and simply listening while I vented. However, my story had sparked her interest. She asked my permission to ask me a couple of questions about the reunion to satisfy her curiosity. I said sure. Her inquiry led to us conversing for another 10 minutes after my emotions were content. She admitted, "I am intrigued by your story. How did you finally find your mother?" I told her, "It was a long, tedious journey, but I ultimately found her through an online people search." "How did she feel about being found?" she asked. I briefly told her the story of how, at first, she denied us, then accepted us the next day after some prompting and prodding. She said, "Wow, what a fascinating story." I felt impressed by her courage to ask me questions, and I was happy to answer them. I appreciated her interest in my story. I thanked her for listening to me, and we said our goodbyes. I hung up the phone, feeling as if a very large weight had been taken away from me. With that burden lifted, I felt happy for the rest of the day and was able to return to work the next day feeling refreshed. It was days after this counseling phone call that I began to spend more time on the phone with Mother and sending her things. Soon after that, I contacted Elsie again. Now that I had gotten my siblings' names directly from my own mother, I remembered Elsie's generous offer. She had told me that if I ever learned my siblings' names, I should feel free to reach out to her again. I felt fortunate to know someone who had access to databases and was willing to help me anytime. I emailed Elsie and told her I had finally found my mother after almost 50 years, and that she was able to tell me the names of the children she had after leaving. I gave her the names and dates of birth for all 4 of the children and asked her if she would check to see if any of them were adopted through her agency. After I had sent the email, I sensed that with all the information I possessed that she was bound to find something this time. I felt very hopeful as I waited for her response. 6 days later, she emailed me back. She was very excited that I had been reunited with my mother. "Wow, that is amazing! Hope it is going well as you two reconnect," she wrote, before thanking me for providing my siblings' information and informing me that she would do everything in her power to help me. She said she would let me know the results of her search. I continued to feel hopeful as I anticipated what she would find. While waiting for her response, I kept on trying to find an appropriate place for my mother to live, just in case, by chance, she actually decided to move to Kansas City to be closer to us.
If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel.